Welcome to Starting a Technology Company. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to week 2. Last week, we focused on the broad question of what it means to start a technology company. And this week, we move from inspiration into judgment. The goal of this week is not just to come up with startup ideas. The goal is to learn how to tell the difference between an idea that sounds interesting and an opportunity that might actually be worth building. By the end of this week, you should be able to explain the difference between B2B and B2C technology businesses, distinguish a business idea from a business opportunity, apply a structured evaluation to that idea, and ideally just generate a lot of different startup ideas that you can actually evaluate. And hopefully, you'll actually find one that makes sense as an opportunity to move forward with. So, why this matters so much? One of the biggest mistakes founders make is falling in love with a concept before they've actually earned the right to believe in that concept. And this week is designed to prevent that. This is all about your judgment as a founder. It gives you a repeatable framework to use to evaluate ideas with discipline, not like your gut feel. And that starts in really one foundational distinction, which is the kind of business you have in terms of the end customer, which is B2C versus B2B. Most technology companies will fall into one of two broad groups. A B2C company sells directly to consumers, and B2C means business to consumer. And so all that means is you're selling to an individual person. In that case, most of the time for consumer facing companies, the buyer and the user are the same person. That contrasts with B2B companies or business to business companies. And business to business companies are businesses selling to a business. And so that means you're selling to an organization. And in that world, the user and the buyer are often different people. And the buying process usually involves a bunch of different stakeholders. And that difference matters a lot if you're B2B versus B2C. It's going to change how you design the product, how you price the product, how you market it, how you ultimately sell it, how you retain people as well. B2C is a game of volume and psychology. Price points are much lower, so success depends on attracting a large audience and extracting a small amount of value from many users. And that might happen through subscriptions, advertising, in-app purchases. You might use a marketplace take rate approach. You may have a hardware that has attached services to it. You may have some sort of complicated monetization based on aggregated insights. Ultimately, though, in B2C businesses, it's about scale. And you have to be obsessive about low friction experiences, conversion rate optimization, virality, which is how effective your users are at spreading your product for you. And that's because the economics of B2C companies are just unforgiving. So if each user is only worth a small amount, you got to get a ton of them and you got to get them cheaply and keep them engaged. That said, if you can do this effectively, some of the biggest companies in the world are B2C companies. So the mass size of the market, where you literally have billions of potential end users, is huge. Contrast that with B2B, where the game is about high value relationships and ultimately organizational ROI. Now, companies are going to buy tools that solve problems for the company. And because those problems are often expensive and complex, the price points tend to be much higher than in business to consumer companies. And because the price points are much higher, you can afford a longer sales cycle. You can afford dedicated salespeople, typically known as account executives, dedicated support, customization. Success is really about navigating organizational politics, understanding the political reasons people buy your products, inclusive of the ROI reasons they buy your products, figuring out how to get people to actually use your product once you've sold it, and ultimately building something that's sticky enough that a customer is not going to want to rip it out later. There is no correct business model. So it is not that B2B is better than B2C or B2C is better than B2B. They're just different. And you just have to be crystal clear about which one it is that you're building in because they are a different set of constraints and opportunities. So the first thing is that clarity on who is your end customer and then the implications of what that means for your business. Once you understand that, then we really want you to focus in on the difference between an idea and an opportunity. And we're going to define these very specifically here. So a business idea is a proposed product or service concept that sounds like it could be valuable, but you really have not validated it. It is just an idea for a potential business. And a business opportunity is when you take that idea and you've actually filtered it through reality. You've actually validated that it reflects a real customer need, that someone has willingness to pay for it or give up something of material value for it, that it is feasible, that you can implement it, that it has some sort of workable economics. So an idea is often centered around the solution. Hey, we should go build this thing versus an opportunity is centered around a customer and market. An idea is we should build this. An opportunity is people will pay for this. And so we use a pretty simple evaluation rubric called the business idea evaluation rubric in this course. And it's just a series of questions that you ask about a business idea to see if it's essentially a valid or a high scoring idea. Rubric asks questions like, hey, is this a specific well-defined problem or is it a vague problem? A vague problem is marketing is hard. A specific problem is I can't reach users at the top of my funnel with the right content at the right time. So a clearly defined problem, a clearly defined pain point, a clear or at least plausible root cause, concise ownership of the problem, ideally one person at one clearly defined role who experiences the pain directly, the ability to pay for the solution, the willingness to pay for the solution, the authority to do it, and so on and so forth, right? You could have an idea that's very interesting and someone has a problem and it's a clear problem for them, but they don't have the budget or the authority or the motivation to buy a solution. So the rubric is set up as just a basic checklist of validity of a business problem. And it's going to force you to ask hard and tricky questions like, is there a measurable cost to inaction? What happens if I don't do anything? Is that problematic or is not doing anything just fine? Has a customer already tried to solve this problem? Are they already spending money on this problem? Is there a realistic path once they become a customer to keeping them as a customer, or is this a one-time problem? And those are the kinds of questions that help founders move from enthusiasm to disciplined evaluation, really understanding that, hey, my idea is good, or in most cases, it was a cool idea, but it's not going to actually be the ideal situation for a business. In the detailed course content, we'll also cover two case studies. We don't cover them here in the podcast just for time, but we'll cover Google AdWords, which is an example of just an exceptionally strong business opportunity. Clear problem. Companies need to reach customers who are actively searching for what they sell. Clear owner to that, which is the person that owns growth and acquisition. Budget already exists. Urgency exists. Extraordinary economics, right? Great business. And there's a logical reason why that's the case. In most cases, though, your evaluations would be more like our second example, which is a consumer dieting app. And that's intentionally quite mixed. On the surface, you may say, hey, that sounds like a cool app. It addresses a big market and it's a real emotional problem. But once you apply the rubric, you start to see some problems. It's actually really difficult to define how there is a person that cares about a dieting app or the owner we can't find from searchable terms. It's not clear if they really have money to spend on this or if the budget is inconsistent, discretionary. Urgency is unclear. Maybe there's urgency at the start of the year, but not the rest of the year. It's difficult to acquire people. Retention might be difficult because we see this as a short-term goal rather than a long-term habit. It's exactly why rubrics matter. They're going to help you reveal hidden weaknesses and ideas that initially may feel very strong. So once you get the rubric in hand, you know how to evaluate ideas. The other thing we want you to think a lot about is just how do you come up with ideas? If you got to go through a lot of ideas to find a good opportunity, you do have to generate a lot of ideas. And the most common source we find for ideas is personal frustration. A lot of the time, businesses are just built on solving a problem you have experienced yourself. And that gives you a bunch of advantages. We call it user founder advantage, but basically just what it means is as a founder, you are also a ideal user for your product. And you're going to have a lot of intuition about the problem, about a workflow that can solve it, and about the features that are important to that. And while that can play out both in the B2C context and personal frustrations, it's also very common in the B2B context where there are professional frustrations. So as you do your work, you may find some workflow that is inefficient. You may find delays. You may find communication breakdowns. You may find repetitive manual work that you hate, right? So if you have a company that's suffering through a process that takes 100 days to complete and you hate every minute of it, and you could build a tool that solves it in 10 minutes, that might be a pretty compelling opportunity, certainly something worth evaluating. So we often start with personal frustrations as business ideas, and professional is kind of the workplace version of that. But beyond that, there are lots of reliable sources for ideas out there. You can look at gaps in the market of current products. You can look at underserved verticals with current products. So a product that might work in the restaurant sector but doesn't work in the home goods sector. You can look at unbundling of horizontal platforms. When you have a big platform that does a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't really do it particularly well for specific use cases, you can take parts, pieces of that platform and offer better solutions for it. You can look at industry or role specific solutions that have low NPS, basically find where incumbents are widely disliked and offer a better solution. You can look at fragmented industries where there's lots of individual providers and software might enable consolidation in those markets. You can look at technology shifts. AI is a good example of this, where you look at the new capabilities from some technology and they're going to make a lot of other technology opportunities possible. So you can start to build those opportunities ahead of time. You can look at legal and regulatory changes. What does the legal and regulatory environment look like? And then how is that going to change demand? And one of my favorites, which is called geographic arbitrage formally, or copying informally, which is you find a proven business model in one geography and then you just copy it and make a version of it that makes it in the local geography. So there's powerful idea generation lenses that you can use out there. And ultimately, it's moving away from just random brainstorming and trying to really have an approach to generating ideas that you can then evaluate in a structured fashion. So that's the high level stuff this week. For this week, for the assignment, what we're going to do is use generative AI as a brainstorming partner, and it'll help you generate a lot of ideas based on your background, your skills, your interests, and experiences. And the first step, in my experience, is just produce a lot of ideas. Don't necessarily pick the first idea that pops in your head. Evaluate 10, 20, 30 of them. Throw a ton of them out there. Look for things that we call schleps, which are painful things that keep coming up. Look for pain points that may have been overlooked. Look for second order effects of new technology. Again, the whole point here is come up with a lot of ideas early on. Of all those ideas, narrow it down to say three that you think make sense from your first order reading of the ideas, and then go through the evaluation on the checklist for all those three. You can do that with AI. You basically hand the idea to an AI, you hand the checklist to an AI, you say, evaluate this. You can read the LLM's analysis of it, and then you go through it and understand, do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? How would you revise it based on that feedback? And ultimately, from those three that you actually do the evaluation on, pick one that you think has a good rubric score, but also one you're genuinely personally interested in, and ultimately deliver from that just a one paragraph summary of, hey, here's the idea, and ultimately here's why I think that idea is a good opportunity. So that's it for week 2. Wrapping up, what I'd leave you with is ideas are plentiful, opportunities are few. And what you're trying to do is learn to judge the difference between those. And that's hard. But ultimately, that's what real founders do. They're not just inventing things willy nilly. They are figuring out where there is a business problem that is real, that is urgent, that is owned, that is fundable, that is feasible, that is economically attractive. And that goes from an idea to an opportunity. An opportunities is what we build companies around. See you all next week. Bye.